The Vierock soldiers surrounded the bloodied human captives, their reptilian mouths curled into sneering grins. Their shimmering armor reflected the bioluminescent jungle, a stark contrast to the mud-caked, battle-worn bodies of the Green Berets kneeling in the dirt. One alien warrior chuckled, nudging a wounded soldier with his boot. "Pathetic creatures! You fought so hard, for what? To die crawling?" Laughter rippled through the Vierock ranks. Captain Elias Grayson spat blood and smirked. His hands were bound behind his back, his ribs screaming in pain, but his voice was steady. "You think this is over?" Commander Zalvek leaned down, his slitted eyes gleaming with amusement. "Your team is finished, human. Accept your fate." Elias met his gaze, unflinching. "Fate? No, you overgrown gecko, this is a setup." The jungle fell silent. Then, the first explosion erupted. The laughter of the Vierock soldiers echoed through the jungle, a guttural, mocking chorus that rang in Captain Elias Grayson's ears. He knelt in the mud, wrists bound behind his back with thick, alien restraints. His ribs ached from the beating, his vision blurred from the blood trickling down his forehead. Around him, his men were in similar states, wounded, restrained, humiliated. A towering Vierock warrior kicked a fallen soldier onto his back, sneering down at the human like a predator toying with its prey. "They call you elite!" The alien scoffed, his armored boot pressing against the man's chest. "I expected more from your kind. Instead, I find this." More laughter. Elias clenched his teeth, suppressing the urge to spit blood in the alien's face. Commander Zalvek approached, his reptilian eyes gleaming with amusement. His armor bore the deep crimson insignia of the Dominion, marking him as a seasoned war leader. He crouched in front of Elias, inspecting him like a curious specimen. "You fought well," Zalvek mused, his voice laced with condescension. "For primitives." He gestured to the wounded men. "Broken. Beaten. A testament to your species' limits. A shame, really." Elias inhaled sharply, adjusting his posture despite the restraints. He felt the weight of every injury, but pain was an old companion, one that sharpened focus. He met Zalvek's gaze, unflinching. "You think this is over?" Elias said, voice steady. The Vierock commander chuckled. "You still believe in hope?" He stood, casting a glance at his warriors. "These creatures are amusing. Resilient, yes, but not enough to matter." One of the aliens retrieved a communication device, speaking in their native tongue. Zalvek nodded. "Reinforcements will arrive soon. We will extract what little knowledge you possess before disposing of you." He exhaled in mock pity. "Perhaps you'll beg before the end." Elias allowed a slow smirk to form. "You shouldn't have left us breathing." Zalvek's amusement faltered. A second later, the first explosion erupted. The jungle trembled as fire and debris tore through the Vierock ranks. The laughter turned to shrieks. A column of smoke spiraled into the canopy. Confusion swept through the aliens, their disciplined formation collapsing in the sudden chaos. Elias moved the moment the explosion hit. He twisted, shifting his weight onto his knees, and with a violent jerk, snapped his restraints against the jagged edge of a nearby rock. The fibers frayed, just enough. His wrists burned as he tore them free. The soldier to his left, Mason, had done the same, bloodied but grinning. "Show time." Before the Vierock could recover, Elias lunged. He slammed his shoulder into the nearest warrior, knocking the alien off balance. In one swift motion, he grabbed the alien's own blade, a sleek energy dagger, and drove it up under the creature's chin. The body convulsed before crumpling. Gunfire erupted. Sergeant Juno had wrestled a weapon from one of the guards and opened fire, the stolen plasma rifle spewing blue energy bolts. More explosions rocked the jungle. Hidden mines, planted days earlier, triggered in a carefully planned chain reaction. The Vierock scrambled for cover. Their superior technology meant nothing in the choking smoke and sudden ambush. Elias dropped low, grabbing another weapon from the fallen, and shouted over the noise. "Regroup on me! Move!" The Green Berets, beaten but not broken, sprang into action. Their injuries slowed them, but their training took over. Mason drove a knife into the throat of an alien trying to recover. Juno ducked behind a fallen log, picking off Vierock soldiers in quick, precise bursts. Zalvek snarled, his confidence shattered. He barked orders in his native tongue, trying to re-establish control, but it was too late. The humans had turned the battlefield against them. A Vierock warrior charged at Elias, swinging a massive energy baton. He barely sidestepped in time, feeling the heat of the weapon graze his shoulder. Using the alien's momentum, he drove his rifle butt into its gut, then fired point-blank into its chest. The jungle was ablaze. The bioluminescent trees flickered in and out of the smoke, casting eerie, shifting shadows. "Fall back!" Zalvek roared, realizing his forces were being cut down too fast. "Regroup at the drop site!" Elias heard it, saw the shift in the alien soldiers. They weren't used to losing. Not like this. Mason wiped sweat and grime from his face. "They're running?" Elias smirked, reloading his rifle. "Not for long." They wouldn't stop now. Not until every last one of them was dead. Smoke twisted through the trees, thick and acrid, a swirling haze of destruction that masked the retreating Vierock forces. The jungle, once alive with eerie bioluminescence, was now a battlefield of flickering embers and shattered bodies. The Green Berets moved like wraiths through the devastation, their steps quick, their breath controlled, each man running on the edge of exhaustion but unwilling to stop. Elias led the charge, his rifle firm in his hands, his ribs screaming with every step. The pain was irrelevant. The Vierock had thought they were already dead men. Now they were the ones bleeding, scattering, stumbling over their fallen. Their arrogance had cracked, their confidence rattled. Elias intended to break it completely. Mason kept pace beside him, face streaked with soot, a fresh gash across his temple. "They're heading to the drop site. Betting they've got an evac plan." "They do," Elias said, eyes locked ahead. "And we're about to ruin it." A guttural shriek cut through the noise. One of the Vierock, slower than the rest, had been caught in the jungle's grasp, a sinkhole masked by the underbrush. His clawed hands flailed as he sank into the muck, the wet earth swallowing him inch by inch. Juno crouched, rifle steady. "Let him drown or put him down." Elias didn't slow. "He's already dead." They pressed on, silent but relentless. The jungle, once an enemy, now worked in their favor. The Vierock, armored and burdened with heavy gear, struggled with every step. The humans, lighter, faster, used every uneven slope, every patch of dense foliage to close the distance. The flickering glow of alien energy weapons ahead marked the retreating forces. Zalvek was keeping them moving, bellowing commands, his voice tight with frustration. The Vierock commander had lost men, and the humans had gained weapons. It wasn't the battle he had envisioned. Elias crouched behind a moss-covered log, assessing. He counted the remaining soldiers, at least a dozen, moving in a loose formation, trying to keep from being picked off. Their landing zone was close. The faint hum of distant engines confirmed it. Juno exhaled. "If they reach their ship, they call reinforcements, and this turns into a slaughter." Elias nodded. "Then we make sure they don't reach it." Mason gave a half-smile. "You got something fun in mind, Cap?" Elias pulled a stolen Vierock energy grenade from his belt. "Yeah. Let's remind them why you never leave a Green Beret alive." Mason's grin widened. "God, I love my job." Juno motioned ahead. 2 guards on the left. Bigger ones carrying a plasma repeater. Elias glanced at the towering figure. Vierock shock troopers, heavily armored, built for close combat. He had no intention of fighting them up close. He thumbed the grenade's activation switch and tossed it. It arced through the trees, a silent blue blur, landing between the guards before either had a chance to react. The explosion sent a shockwave through the jungle, blasting the nearest Vierock apart. The shock trooper staggered but remained upright, armor scorched, weapon charging. Juno fired first. A precise shot to the joint of the alien's knee armor. The Vierock faltered. Mason followed up, unloading a full burst into its exposed side. It collapsed, a gurgled snarl the last sound it made. The jungle erupted in chaos once again. Zalvek spun toward the commotion, his slitted eyes wide with rage. Hold formation! Kill them! The Vierock fired blindly into the foliage. Energy bolts seared past Elias as he ducked behind a fallen tree. He motioned to Juno. Flank right. Mason, with me left. Cut off their escape. Juno disappeared into the undergrowth, moving like a shadow. Mason followed Elias, slipping between trees, weapons ready. The Vierock were still adjusting, their formation unraveling. They hadn't expected another ambush, hadn't expected humans to fight like this, with precision, patience, and ruthless efficiency. Elias sighted a soldier attempting to retreat toward the clearing. He fired twice, one shot to drop him, another to finish the job. Juno's rifle crackled from the right, picking off another alien. Mason took down a third, blade sinking into the weak point of its armor before dragging it to the ground. The Vierock numbers thinned. Zalvek, now fully exposed, had no choice but to fight. He bared his fangs, pulling a massive curved blade from his side, his plasma pistol gripped tight in his other hand. Elias stepped forward, lowering his rifle slightly. Not laughing anymore? The Vierock commander's chest heaved, his pride boiling over into fury. You are nothing, he snarled. A species clawing at the stars like children pretending to be warriors. Elias tilted his head. Yeah? Then why are your men dying, and mine are still standing? Zalvek roared and charged. Elias sidestepped the first strike. The alien was fast, faster than he expected, the blade slicing through the air just inches from his ribs. Mason moved in from the side, aiming for an opening, but Zalvek twisted, driving an armored elbow into Mason's gut. The soldier staggered back, gasping for air. Elias took the opening, raising his rifle. Zalvek was ready, swinging his blade, knocking the barrel aside just as Elias fired. The shot went wide. The Vierock commander's pistol snapped up. Elias barely ducked as the plasma bolt seared past his shoulder, the heat burning through his fatigues. He gritted his teeth and drove forward, slamming his rifle butt into Zalvek's jaw. The alien stumbled, but only for a second. Juno fired from the trees. The shot hit Zalvek's shoulder, sending a burst of blue blood into the air. The commander staggered, snarling, but stayed on his feet. Mason, recovered, lunged again, his combat knife flashing. The blade drove into the side of Zalvek's leg. The alien howled, swinging wildly, but the damage was done. He was slowing. Elias seized the moment. He dropped his rifle, grabbing Zalvek's wrist, twisting the plasma pistol from his grasp. In the same motion, he slammed his knee into the alien's stomach, forcing him back. Zalvek wheezed, blood dripping from his mouth, fury still burning in his eyes. Elias leveled the stolen pistol at his head. You were saying? For the first time, the commander hesitated. The certainty in his expression wavered. A sharp, mechanical sound filled the air. The distant hum of approaching engines. Juno swore. Reinforcements. Elias didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The shot burned through Zalvek's chest. The commander staggered, clawing at the wound, his body failing, his arrogance dying with him. He crumpled, face down in the mud, the jungle swallowing him whole. Elias exhaled, the tension still coiled in his chest. Mason wiped his blade on his sleeve. We should move. Juno reloaded. They'll be here in minutes. Elias glanced toward the clearing. Smoke still curled through the trees, the battlefield littered with bodies. Then we finish what we started. The jungle pulsed with an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant hum of approaching engines. The Vierock reinforcements were closing in. The air carried the acrid scent of scorched foliage, the remnants of the earlier explosions still clinging to the battlefield. Zalvek's lifeless form lay twisted in the mud, his arrogance silenced. Elias adjusted his grip on the stolen plasma rifle. His breathing was steady, his mind already working through their next move. The battle had turned in their favor, but they weren't safe yet. Not by a long shot. Mason knelt beside one of the fallen Vierock, yanking a fresh energy cell from the alien's belt. They'll be bringing heavier firepower this time. Won't be making the same mistakes. Juno kept her eyes on the sky, her fingers drumming against her rifle. We've got minutes, maybe less. We stay here, we're dead. Elias surveyed the jungle. The terrain had worked against the Vierock before, but now it was shifting against them as well. The fires had spread, choking sections of the forest with thick black smoke, reducing visibility. That would be a problem for their enemies, but it also meant fewer places to hide. We don't run, Elias said. We make them regret coming here. Mason exhaled, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Hell, I was hoping you'd say that. Juno wasn't smiling. And what's the plan, exactly? Because we're running low on everything. Elias crouched, dragging a crude map into the dirt with the butt of his rifle. They're coming in from the east. Their drop zone is just over this ridge. If they land, we're done. We hit them before they touch the ground. Juno's brow furrowed. You want us to attack a landing party? With what? Elias wiped the sweat and dirt from his face. With everything they left us. Mason's eyes flicked to the wreckage of the battlefield, the downed soldiers, the scattered weapons, the half-destroyed gear that still had some fight left in it. Understanding dawned. Booby traps. Make this jungle a goddamn minefield. Elias nodded. We hit fast, hit hard, and disappear before they know what hit them. Juno exhaled sharply. That's a suicide mission. It's survival, Elias corrected. They think they're the hunters. Time to show them otherwise. There was no more arguing. They moved. Mason dragged bodies, stripping them of anything useful. Juno worked on the explosives, rigging salvaged Vierock grenades into crude but deadly traps along the jungle paths. Elias kept watch, ears tuned to the growing roar of engines. The shadows deepened. The enemy was close. Juno wiped her hands on her fatigues. Traps are set. Mason shouldered a captured Vierock rifle. Positions? Elias pointed toward the treeling. We funnel them in, force them where we want them. The moment they step into the kill zone, we light them up. They took their places, blending into the undergrowth, rifles steady, fingers poised on triggers. The seconds stretched, tension coiling tight. Then the first dropship pierced through the smoke, its sleek hull gleaming under the glow of burning treetops. The Vierock reinforcements descended in disciplined formation, weapons raised, scanning the ruins of their fallen. Their movements were sharp, methodical. They weren't laughing anymore. A squad leader barked orders in their guttural tongue. The soldiers fanned out. One stepped too close to a hidden tripwire. The explosion was instant. The blast hurled two Vierock backward, their bodies crushed against the trees. The jungle erupted with fire. Elias squeezed the trigger. His plasma rifle hummed, bolts slicing through the smoke. Mason was already moving, firing in bursts, staying low. Juno picked her shots, dropping targets with ruthless precision. The Vierock scrambled for cover, their coordination breaking apart under the relentless ambush. Their advanced armor meant nothing when they were fighting shadows. A towering brute of a soldier roared, his energy shield flaring as he charged through the chaos. Mason swore. Big one, coming in fast! Elias pivoted, adjusting his aim. Take out his legs! Juno fired first, her shot striking the alien's knee joint. The shield flickered. Mason followed up with a burst to the chest. The Vierock staggered but kept coming. Elias moved, closing the distance. He ducked under a wild swing, planted a boot against the alien's shin, and drove his rifle butt into its jaw. The moment the creature reeled, he flipped the rifle and fired point-blank into its exposed throat. The brute crumpled, gurgling. More enemies pushed through the smoke. They weren't retreating this time. Juno gritted her teeth. They're adapting. Then we hit harder, Elias snapped. Mason reloaded. We've got about 20 left. They're pushing for the drop site. Elias's mind raced. They couldn't let that happen. We move now. Cut them off. They wove through the jungle, staying low, keeping ahead of the shifting battle. The remaining Vierock were regrouping, trying to secure their landing zone. Elias caught sight of their lead officer, a tall, heavily armored warrior issuing sharp orders, keeping his unit together. The weak point. Elias motioned to Juno. Take out the leader. Juno nodded, adjusting her aim. The rifle's energy core whined as it charged. She held her breath. Fired. The officer's head snapped back, a clean shot through the skull. His body hit the dirt, lifeless. The remaining Vierock hesitated. The fight was turning against them. Elias seized the moment. Now! They surged forward, pressing the attack. Mason tackled one soldier, driving his knife deep into the alien's gut. Juno landed a perfect headshot on another. The last few Vierock, leaderless and outmatched, did something none of them expected. They ran. The battle was over. The jungle was theirs. Mason dropped onto a fallen log, breathing hard. Holy hell, we actually pulled that off. Juno wiped sweat from her brow. For now. Elias stood, gaze still fixed on the smoking battlefield. They'll be back. Mason looked at the scattered bodies, the wreckage, the destruction they had left behind. Next time, we'll be ready. Elias nodded. Damn right we will. The jungle still smoldered, the distant fires casting long shadows through the thick undergrowth. The bodies of fallen Vierock littered the ground, their blood mixing with the dirt, turning the soil into something dark and slick. The air reeked of burned foliage and scorched armor, a battlefield stripped of its illusions. The silence was unnerving. It wasn't victory. Not yet. Elias reloaded, his fingers working from muscle memory. His breathing was controlled, but his pulse pounded in his ears. They had struck hard, faster than the Vierock had expected, but this wasn't over. The Dominion wouldn't take humiliation lightly. They would return in force, smarter and angrier. Mason wiped sweat from his forehead, his hands blackened from smoke and gunpowder. We need to vanish before they regroup. Juno adjusted her grip on her rifle, eyes scanning the tree line. They're not just regrouping. Her voice was low, tense. They're changing tactics. Elias followed her gaze. Movement flickered between the trees. Shadows. Unnatural stillness. The Vierock had stopped charging blindly. They were watching. Learning. The realization settled in his gut like a cold weight. They're hunting us now, he murmured. Mason exhaled sharply. Well, that's new. Elias motioned for them to spread out. We don't let them. They moved silently, using the jungle's dense cover keeping low. The humidity was suffocating, sweat clinging to their skin, mixing with dirt and blood. Every step was careful, deliberate. The Vierock weren't rushing this time. They had shifted into something far more dangerous: precision. A branch snapped in the distance. Not loud, but deliberate. Elias froze, raising a hand. Mason and Juno halted instantly, weapons raised. The enemy was close. Then came the whisper, an eerie, guttural voice, carried by the wind. It wasn't words, not in any language Elias recognized. A slow, rhythmic growl, like a predator calling to its pack. Juno swallowed. That's not normal. Elias nodded. They're not just hunting us. They're trying to break us. Mason's jaw clenched. Then we break them first. Elias gestured toward a nearby ravine, its steep walls covered in thick vines. We funnel them in. Use their own tactics against them. Juno gave a tight nod. Ambush in an ambush. They moved quickly, positioning themselves along the higher ground, rifles primed. The jungle fell into a suffocating quiet. The Vierock were coming. Then movement. A sleek figure darted between the trees, faster than before. No heavy armor. No reckless charge. These weren't the same soldiers they had fought earlier. These were hunters. Elias fired first, a clean shot through the underbrush. The plasma bolt tore into the nearest Vierock's shoulder, sending it sprawling. But instead of collapsing, the alien twisted, using the impact to roll behind cover, moving with an unnatural fluidity. Mason swore. They're adapting. More movement. Blurred figures circled them, closing the distance. The jungle itself seemed alive with their presence, shifting in unnatural ways. Juno fired, hitting one mid-dash. It dropped, but another took its place instantly. Elias felt it, an invisible pressure closing in. The Vierock weren't attacking in force anymore. They were testing. Forcing them into mistakes. He gritted his teeth. Hold your fire. Wait. The team went still. The Vierock hesitated. The silence stretched. Then a mistake. One of the aliens, too eager to finish the hunt, stepped into the open. Elias didn't hesitate. A single shot, precise and final. The body hit the ground. And just like that, the trap they had walked into shattered. The Vierock lunged. Mason pivoted, unloading a full burst into the first attacker. Juno dropped another with a single headshot. Elias moved, fast and calculated, weaving between the onslaught, each shot deliberate. One of the hunters reached him, its blade arcing in a deadly swing. He dodged barely, the heat of the weapon slicing the air where his head had been a second ago. Elias didn't give it a second chance. He caught its wrist, twisting with brutal efficiency, forcing the blade into the alien's own chest. The Vierock shuddered, gasping, before crumpling. Mason drove his knife into the throat of another. Juno's rifle clicked empty, but she didn't stop. She grabbed a fallen plasma pistol, turned, and fired point-blank into the last attacker's skull. Then silence. Elias wiped his sleeve across his face, breath ragged. The hunters were dead, but the feeling in his gut didn't fade. Juno reloaded. That wasn't all of them. Elias nodded. They were testing weaknesses. Next wave won't make the same mistakes. Mason glanced at the bodies. Then we give them a reason to rethink this whole damn fight. Elias motioned toward the ridge. We take their landing site. And this before they get another chance. No one argued. They had come too far to stop now. The jungle was dying. Fires crackled through the underbrush, casting thick, twisting smoke into the sky. The scent of charred foliage mixed with blood and burning metal. The jungle had been their battlefield, their ally. Now, it was turning into a graveyard. Elias moved swiftly, his boots pressing into scorched earth as he led his team toward the ridge. The landing site was close. The Vierock's reinforcements had slowed, but they weren't done. They had underestimated humans once. They wouldn't do it again. Juno checked her rifle's charge. They'll be dug in. They know we're coming. Mason wiped sweat from his forehead, scanning the tree line. We take too long, they regroup. We hit them before they have the chance. Elias crouched behind a rock, eyes locked on the clearing below. The Vierock had fortified the landing zone. Barricades had been thrown together from fallen trees and debris. Patrols stalked the perimeter, plasma rifles in hand. More soldiers gathered near a massive drop ship, its engines humming as it prepared for departure. They weren't just bringing in more troops. They were trying to get word back to command. If that happened, more ships would follow. Bigger ones. With enough firepower to wipe the jungle clean. Elias exhaled. We're stopping that ship. Mason raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do we take out an armored transport with 3 people? Juno tilted her head toward a stack of fuel canisters near the landing ramp. Explosives. Enough to turn that thing into scrap metal. Elias studied the layout. They couldn't charge in. Not with that many eyes scanning the field. They had to break their formation. Shake their confidence. He turned to Mason. Get me their comms. Mason grinned. Now we're talking. Slipping through the underbrush, Mason worked quickly, dragging a fallen Vierock soldier into cover. He ripped the communicator from the alien's belt, fiddling with the frequency. A sharp burst of static filled the earpiece, followed by hurried voices in the Vierock's guttural language. Mason smirked. Let's have some fun. He pressed the transmitter and, in his best approximation of the Vierock's barking speech, growled. Human forces advancing. Fall back to primary extraction. A heartbeat of silence. Then confusion. 2 guards near the ship turned toward each other, hesitant. A third spoke quickly into his own transmitter, relaying the unexpected order. The chain reaction was instant. The organized ranks wavered. Some held their ground, unsure. Others started shifting back, their weapons raised, waiting for an enemy that wasn't coming. Elias seized the opening. Now! Juno fired first, her shot striking a fuel drum near the barricade. The explosion ripped through the camp, sending bodies flying. Mason picked off a distracted soldier, dropping him before he could react. The landing site exploded into chaos. Vierock scrambled for cover, firing wildly into the trees. They weren't just fighting enemies, they were fighting the idea that they had already lost. Elias sprinted through the smoke, closing the distance to the ship. A Vierock warrior lunged at him, swinging a plasma blade. He ducked, twisting, slamming the butt of his rifle into the alien's jaw. The soldier staggered. Elias drove a knife under its ribs, twisting hard. The body slumped. Mason took down another, rolling into cover behind a supply crate. "We're running out of time!" Juno was already at the fuel cache, planting the last of their stolen charges. She pressed the detonator into Elias' palm. 30 seconds once you hit the switch. Elias turned toward the ramp. The last of the Vierock forces were scrambling onto the ship, their discipline shattered. If they got off-world, their command would know what had happened. That wasn't an option. Elias moved. He leapt onto the ramp, gunning down the first soldier who turned toward him. Another swung a rifle. He caught the barrel, wrenching it sideways before driving his knee into the alien's gut. The Vierock collapsed. The pilot stood in the cockpit doorway, a plasma pistol in hand. His eyes widened. Elias fired first. The shot hit center mass. The pilot fell backward, the pistol clattering from his grip. The ship was his. Mason's voice crackled over the comm. 10 seconds! Elias grabbed the detonator. He bolted down the ramp, hitting the jungle floor just as the countdown reached 0. The explosion tore through the clearing. Fire ripped through the ship's hull, engulfing the Vierock soldiers still inside. The shockwave knocked Elias forward, heat searing the back of his neck. Mason pulled him to his feet. "You good?" Elias coughed, nodding. "Yeah." Juno watched the wreckage burn, the last of the Vierock forces either dead or retreating into the jungle. "It's over." Elias turned, surveying the battlefield. The ship was in flames. The enemy was gone. There would be no reinforcements. No counterattack. The United Terran Federation would never know what happened here. The history books wouldn't tell the story. But the Vierock would remember. Elias exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Let's go home."